as I said, if you want a test you could get a great score on, this could be the test. Unfortunately, tests on this one are usually really, really high or really, really, really low. So I have had times where all the scores are very high. I've had times where it's half of them are really high and half of them are really low. So let's try to get all of them up there. This is really stuff that everybody can do, okay? So try to teach you what this looks like. Basic graph of sine and cosine. We're into graph, sine, and cosine. And we're gonna do it like this, okay? We're gonna make an x and y chart, okay? X values, y values. So you learn how to graph lines, circles, all sorts of things, but I'm going to learn how to graph a sine function. And we're going to start with an x value of 0. Do you remember what the sine of 0 is? It is 0. So the first coordinate that sine passes through is 0, 0. Now, there's some very nice spots where sine has some unique values. And those are pi over 6, pi over 4, pi over 3, and pi over 2. Kind of running out of room there, sorry. So I'm going to, is sine the y value or the r value? It's the y value, okay? So I'm going to make a little shape here. Pi over 6 is how many degrees? You just took the test on it. How many degrees is pi over 6? 30 degrees. So what special triangle does it make? 30, 60, 90. And you know that this angle is, or this side is 1, so this side is a half, and this side is 33 over 2. So if sine is the y value, the sine of 30 degrees is 1/2. So there we go. Sine of pi over 6 is 0.5, or 1/2. All right, more connections. Pi over 4. What angle does pi over 4 make? 45 degrees. And you realize that this is 0. I'm sorry, this is 1. So what's this side? Root of 2 over 2. Just took the test on it, okay? Now, sine is the y value. The root of 2 over 2 as a decimal is 0.7071. Yep. And we're going to do pi over 3. Pi over 3 is what as an angle? 60 degrees. What special triangle do we have? 30, 60, 90. This side is 1, so what's this side? 1/2. What's this side? So therefore, as you look at this, it's the y value. If you take the square root of 3 over 2, it's 0.86. And finally, pi over 2. Yes. If you were to look at pi over 2, how many degrees is pi over 2? 90 degrees. So if I make a 90-degree angle, what is the xy coordinate there? What's the x value? What's the y value? And which value is sine? It's the y value, so it's 1. Okay. All right, you guys did the heavy lifting. The rest of this should be pretty straightforward now that you got those values. What I'm going to do is I'm going to sketch a graph. I'm going to mark it out. You have to get used to this. I'm going to call this 2 pi. What's halfway between 0 and 2 pi? 1 pi. What's halfway between 0 and pi? Pi over 2. Now, very important that you understand this piece, otherwise you'll forget how to count. 1 pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, which is just pi. See? 1 pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, 3 pi over 2. There you go. Now, I'm going to mark the top and the bottom. I'm going to mark the top at +1 and mark the bottom at -1. I'm going to plot these points and see what shape I come up with to see what the sine graph makes. 0, 0. Pi over 6 is 1/3 of a pi over 2. It's going to be right about here, pi over 6. Think about it, 30 degrees, 90 degrees. It's going to be right about here. And the y value is 0.5, so it's going to be about like that. These are very rough estimates, approximations. Where is pi over 4 going to fit between 0 and pi over 2? It's going to be halfway, yep. And I get 0.707, so about like that. Pi over 3 is going to be even closer, isn't it? So that's going to be right here. And then pi over 2, 1. Now, this is where the aha moment has to come into effect, you guys. Which quadrant is 0 to pi over 2? 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, 2 pi. Which quadrant is between 0 and pi over 2? 1. This is the first quadrant. How about pi over 2 to pi? Which quadrant is that? Well, let's look at it. From pi over 2 to pi is quadrant 2. Pi to 3 pi over 2, that's quadrant 3. And 3 pi over 2 to 2 pi is quadrant 4. Do you remember which quadrants is sine positive in? All students take calculus. So first and second. So therefore it's negative in the third and the. Is a graph positive when it's above the x-axis or below the x-axis? Above. So sine is positive or above the x-axis in the first and second quadrants. It is negative in the third and fourth. What shape does it make? It makes a wave. This is so applicable. Do you know what things in the real world travel in shapes of waves? Light, sound, microwaves. Yeah, you got all sorts of things travel in waves. You can actually take my voice and model it as it travels to your ears as a sine function. We could find the exact function that travels that way. Galileo said this. You guys know who Galileo was? A great scientist. He said, astronomer, he said mathematics was the language with which the universe was created. So he said, light, you got a sine wave. Okay, sound, you got a sine wave. The fact is that mathematics is the structure of all things. It is. It's really cool. And here's the example right there. So here's what we have. Over the interval 0 to 2 pi, we learn certain characteristics about the sine function. What's the biggest value that sine has over the interval 0 to 2 pi? What's the highest spot it reaches? 1. Pi. What's the lowest spot it reaches? -1. The amplitude of a wave is the distance from its middle to its highest spot or its middle to its lowest spot. So its middle is right here at 0. How high or low does it go? 1. It's always a positive value. Your amplitude is always a positive value. Period means how often does it repeat itself? So look, it's headed up right here. See that trajectory? When you tell me to stop when I get to that same kind of approach again. Now it's on its way down. I want it when it's on its way right there, right? So how long does it take before it repeats itself? a distance of 2 pi. Now, cosine is very similar. There's just a small difference. We're going to mark out 2 pi. What's half of 2 pi? Pi. What's half of pi? Okay, and what's in between pi and 2 pi? 3 pi over 2. Top is 1, bottom is -1. Question. Okay, so period means when it repeats itself, when it will do the same thing over again. And so now I'm going to use my really cool technology. Watch this. We'll see if it works. This green function is my sine function. Oh, it won't do it. Okay, so watch this. It's after 2 pi units that it will do the same thing over again. So if you were to take this and move it, well, that's kind of good. It would start to do that same thing all over again. It would look the same thing. Every 2 pi, it does the same thing over again, from 0 to 2 pi. Does that help a little bit? Okay, now, here's the difference, you guys. The cosine of 0 is not 0. Do you know what it is? It's 1. It just is. We'll show you. If you were to make a shape here, and Isa, I was to draw 0 degrees, okay? What is the coordinate right there? What's the x coordinate? What's the y coordinate? 0. Cosine, is cosine the x value or the y value? X value. So it's 1. So the cosine of 0 is 1. That's why it works out. And then it's cosine of pi over 2, that's 0. It's cosine of pi, that's -1. It's cosine of 3 pi over 2, that's 0. It's cosine of 2 pi, that goes back to 1. So it's very similar to the sine graph. It's still a wave. It's just shifted. How are your waves coming? Are you doing a good job with them? Cosine, I can actually pick the graph up and it looks basically identical to the sine graph if I just move it over a little bit. And we'll learn a little bit more about that as time goes on. Today, we're going to learn the basics, the very, very basics. You are not going to sketch any graphs today. We are going to identify we're going to identify amplitudes and periods today. Over the interval of 0 to 2 pi, you tell me, again, what is the maximum value that cosine has? 1. What is the minimum value cosine has? The amplitude is the amount it goes up or down from the center. And the period is how long it takes to repeat itself. Watch this. When is it that the graph starts to go down again, just like it starts out? You tell me when I get there. All right, yep. So you can see it took 2 pi units to start to repeat itself, okay? I'm just choosing to include it. Just choosing to include it. Okay, so this is what we're going to practice today. The amplitude of a graph, it can change, okay? My voice travels as a sine wave, but I'm telling you that the amplitude of my voice is not 1 foot, or it's not 1 meter, or it's not 1 mile, or it's not 1 inch. It's something, but I don't know what it is, okay? If we have a number out front, in front of the sine, right now we're just going to look at A and B. There's going to be time we're going to look at C and D, but right now we're just going to look at A and B. The amplitude is the absolute value, meaning what it means to have absolute value. It's always positive. It's the positive value of whatever's out front. Same thing for cosine. The period, how often it repeats itself, is shaped by whatever b value you have. And what you do is you take 2 pi, that's what the period normally is, and you divide it by your b value. And that will be the new period for both functions. Now, if somebody can remind me on Monday, I will print you off a sheet of notes that you get to use on your test, okay? So I forgot to print that off for you today, but you'll see it right away. So you guys know how I gave you that note sheet for the test? I will give you a note sheet from now on at the very beginning of the unit, so you can see exactly what you're going to have. Let's flip it over, and this is what we're going to practice, and then you'll have your assignment. Okay, what we want to do right now is look at the equation, and we want to determine the amplitude and the period. In order to do that, you just have to determine the a value and the b value. The a value is what's in front of the function. The b value is what is in front of x. What's the a value? 1. What's the b value? 4. So the amplitude of this function is the absolute value of 1, which is 1. The period is 2 pi divided by the b value. 2 pi divided by 4 is pi over 2. It's 1. Yes. Yep. Okay. Look at number 2. What's the amplitude for number 2? 1. What is the period? 2 pi divided by 5. Does that reduce? No. Look at number 3. What is the amplitude? 1. What is the period? It's always 2 pi divided by your b value, what's ever in front of x. What's the amplitude for 4? 4. What is the period? Number 5, what's the amplitude? Positive 2. What's the period? Number 6, what's the period? Or amplitude? What's the period? 2 pi over negative 4. And can you reduce that? Yes. So we would say it's negative pi over 2. And you guys, I'm going to be honest with you, that repeating itself in a negative direction is the same as repeating itself in a positive direction. So you can make this positive as well. Okay, number 7, what's the amplitude? 3. The period, I take 2 pi and I divide it by 2/3. So I got 2 pi over 1 divided by 2 over 3. How do I divide fractions? Multiply by the reciprocal, so times 3 over 2. What cancels? The 2's cancel, and you're left with 3 pi. Look at number 8. What's the amplitude? What's the period? 2 pi over 5. And number 9, the amplitude and the period, 2 pi over negative 2, we can leave it as positive pi. It will repeat itself as positive pi. Okay, now we look at the actual graphs. The amplitude is how high it goes or how low it goes, okay? How high does this go up or down? 3 units is the amplitude. Good. Now, this is where it's a little bit confusing. You tell me, how long does it take before it gets to that kind of same mark right there, okay? You tell me when I'm there. So if this is 2 pi, that's halfway between. It takes every pi. Yep. Okay. Can we write the equation? Okay, so this is going to be a little bit tricky, you guys, okay? We have y equals, what number goes in front of sine? 3. And is it sine or cosine? Why? Because it starts at 0, so it's sine. So 3 sine. And then we have to decide what goes in front of x. We don't know the b value, do we? But we have a formula. What's the formula for a period? Period is equal to 2 pi divided by b. Okay? So let's solve for what b is. What is my period in this problem? So I'll write pi over 1 is equal to 2 pi divided by b. How do I solve for that? What do I do? So I get pi times b is equal to 2 times pi. Divide by pi, and b is, so it's 3 sine of 2x is what it ends up being. See that? Let's look at the next one. What's the amplitude? 4. Period. You tell me when I get to the same spot right there, okay? Yes. So how long is that? 2 pi, okay? So the period is 2 pi. Is this a sine graph or is this a cosine graph? Why is it cosine? Because it starts at the top. So I have to solve for the b value. I know a. What's the a value? 4. But I don't know what the b value is, do I? Okay. So I'll write it. Y equals 4 times cosine of, we got to figure it out. Again, the period is equal to 2 pi over b. What is the period? 2 pi is equal to 2 pi over b. So 2 pi over 1 equals 2 pi over b. How do I solve? So 2 pi times b is equal to 2 pi. How do I solve for b? Divide by 2 pi. And I get b is equal to 1. So there's just a 1 that goes in front of the x. Okay, look at number 12. What's the amplitude? 2. What's the period? You tell me when I get to that same spot. Yes, right here, right? So how long does it take? 4 pi. Is this going to be sine or cosine? Now we got to figure out what the b value is, right? Period is equal to 2 pi divided by b. My period is 4 pi. So 4 pi over 1 equals 2 pi over b. How do I solve? I cross multiply. 4 pi times b is equal to 2 pi. Divide by 4 pi. B is equal to, what happens to the pi's? And 2 over 4 is, so 1/2 is the number that goes in front of the x. I'm going to try to show you guys a quicker way of doing this to see if you can get the connection for the last one, okay? Look at this example right here. How many cycles does this graph have between 0 and 2 pi? Does everybody see it repeats itself twice? How many cycles does this have between 0 and 2 pi? If you don't see it, continue to do it the way that we did. How many cycles does this have between 0 and 2 pi? Just a half of one. How many cycles does this have between 0 and 2 pi? 1. What's the amplitude? 5. What's the period? 2 pi. Can somebody tell me what's different? Is this a sine or a cosine? It's a cosine, but what's different about it? Instead of starting at the top, it starts at the... So what number, instead of a 5 going in front, what number do you think goes in front? -5. When it's flipped upside down, we put a negative in front. Cosine of, and how many does it do? Just 1, so 1x. Yep, very good, very good. That's all you're going to practice today, okay? So, oh, we're about that time. Wow, what a great use of time. Excellent.